So, good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina Epstein. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a policy analyst here at Disability Rights California. Tonight's presentation will be the 2026 Budget Town Hall, where we will talk about how will the governor's 2026 budget affect Californians with disabilities. Our cover slide has an image of the governor's seal and a microphone, as well as the flag of California. For a brief visual description, I am a white woman with short curly hair and glasses, and I have a virtual background behind me with the Disability Rights California logo. I will now go over our agenda for the presentation. First, we are going to talk about the budget through some introductions to what the budget means. Then we're going to talk about disability budget highlights across several topics, including IHSS, Medi-Cal, education, housing, mental health, and the Department of Developmental Services. From there, we'll talk about next steps in the process and how your voice can be involved. And lastly, we'll wrap up with questions, which we'll take from the chat, the Q&A function, or raised hands. And on this slide, there's an image of a group of disabled people, some arrows pointing to the state capitol, because our goal this evening is really to talk about how authentic disability voices can be heard in the Capitol and to equip you with the information that you need to raise your voice. So, what is the governor's budget and why does it matter? Each year, the governor and the state legislature decide on a budget for the state of California. The budget is about priorities. Where should California spend its dollars? What state programs need more funds or less funds? The state budget dollars come from three places: state taxes, federal funds, and bonds. And together, they total over $346 billion for the upcoming year. So this is how are we going to spend that huge amount of money as a state? And the state constitution says the budget has to be balanced each year. That means that the state cannot just choose to go into more debt or make up dollars out of nowhere. So you may have heard in the news that we are in a budget deficit here in California, and I want to explain the situation a little bit. Why are we here? California has an estimated deficit of $2.9 billion this year, but that does not account for the deficit potentially increasing in future years because of both federal policies and economic risks. In past years, about 35% of the state budget has come from federal funds, and that is changing. HR 1, which you may also know as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and other policies from the federal government are taking away funding that California would have used on healthcare, on food assistance, and more. And this money did not just disappear. HR 1 and other policies from the federal government redirect this funding to tax cuts and the wealthiest few, and to funding for ICE. So it's really important that as we talk about the violence that is inflicted by taking away people's health care in our state, that is also directly tied to the violence that we are seeing most recently in Minneapolis, and of course in Los Angeles and throughout California, where people are being violently taken away from their families. In addition to reducing the state funds, the policies in HR 1 cost the state money to implement. This year's budget has an estimated $1.4 billion for the upcoming year in state funds to implement the federal policies that are required. So HR 1 is not just taking away state money, it's forcing the state to spend money in places that may not align with our priorities as a state. So this slide has a timeline on it that's illustrated by an arrow, and this is the budget process. So these are the key dates. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today, but we can provide some resources if you want to learn more about the budget process. On January 10th, the governor must release the proposed budget, and this is the first draft. So all the policies we're talking about today are part of that first draft. Then on February 1st, trailer bill language comes out. And Vivian's going to talk a bit more about what that means, but it's starting to fill in some of those details from the first draft. From there, there's budget hearings, where the legislature performs its oversight duties to see what's in the budget and discuss it with the public. On May 14th, the governor will release the May revision, which is the second draft of the budget. Then there will be even more hearings. And lastly, on June 15th, the governor and the legislature must have together a final draft of the state budget that gets passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. So now I'm going to turn it over to some of my colleagues to discuss the budget highlights. As we talk about each policy and how it will affect people with disabilities in our state, I hope you keep in mind that these policies are proposals. They're part of that first draft, and they have not gone into effect yet, which means now is not the time to panic. It's the time to advocate. For each budget change that we are going to describe in the webinar, we have targets for advocacy linked in the slides, and we're going to share out these slides with all of you after the presentation shortly. So I hope that you keep in mind as you hear these changes, if you're worried about them, if you have concerns, you have an opportunity to raise your voice. Now is the perfect time in that timeline that I just showed you to do that. I'm now going to pass it to Anna.
Thank you, Sabrina. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Anna Leach Proffer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the managing attorney for DRC's Healthcare and Home and Community-Based Services Practice Group. For a visual description, I am a middle-aged white woman. I am wearing a blue, white, and pink striped button-down shirt tonight. Today, I am going to open us up by discussing three proposals in the budget that impact the in-home supportive services, or IHSS program. So the first proposal would eliminate the IHSS backup provider system. So this change would save the state $3.5 million by eliminating the current backup provider program. This program was created several years ago with the goal of creating a system where IHSS recipients whose provider was out sick or otherwise temporarily unavailable could get services from another provider on short notice by contacting the county and being matched up with a backup provider. This was something that the DRC supported. It was a great idea. Unfortunately, the execution wasn't really where we needed it to be, and the program struggled to achieve that goal, actually match people with backup providers in a timely fashion. So the program has been underutilized. Even though this program has struggled, DRC opposes eliminating it. Instead, what our position is that we like to encourage the state to explore options for improving the function of the program because it is something that could serve an important need for people who, absolutely need those IHSS services every day, even if their permanent provider is sick or unavailable to visit their home on that day. The second proposal is one with a bit of a confusing title. So it's discussed as aligning the residual program with Medi-Cal eligibility. What this proposal would do basically is save the state an estimated $86 million by terminating IHSS at the same time that Medi-Cal is terminated. So the way things currently work, Counties are able to move IHSS recipients into a different type of IHSS program called the IHSS residual program, sometimes called IHSS R program. And that program can be used for up to 2 months after Medi-Cal has been terminated. So this proposal would eliminate that option. And this is very concerning for us because many Medi-Cal terminations are a result of errors or delays that are beyond the recipient's control. And this process has created a sort of grace period that allows individuals to have a couple months to get their Medi-Cal reinstated without immediately losing access to the essential IHSS services they're receiving. So if this were to go into effect, somebody would get a notice that their Medi-Cal was being terminated. That notice would also state that the IHSS would be terminated on the same date. So there would no longer be an option for the county to have those IHSS services continue for a short period while the Medi-Cal eligibility issue was being resolved. The final proposal that I'll mention today is a proposal to shift the cost of program growth to counties. So this is a proposal that would result in significant savings, an estimated 233.6 million. What it would do is it would make counties pay for 100% of the cost of any increase in IHSS per case hours. So just for a little bit of background, so currently counties pay for only about 30 to 35% of the of the cost of the IHSS services. So while this is technically not a cut in IHSS services, our concern is that this change will result in a very strong incentive for counties to reduce IHSS hours in order to reduce the amount of money that they're going to have to pay out of their county budget toward the IHSS program. We're also concerned that this shifting in cost to the counties is going to lead the counties to cut other essential services, including behavioral health services, and lead to an overall reduction in the amount of county services and money available. As Sabrina mentioned, we do have some information. It's going to be on the bottom of each of the slides that indicates which Senate and budget subcommittees cover each of these areas. So for IHSS services, the Senate Budget Subcommittee 3 on Health and Human Services covers IHSS, and then the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 2 on Human Services is the subcommittee that handles IHSS in the Assembly. So I am going to now turn it back over to Sabrina.
Thanks, Anna. This is Sabrina again. I'm now going to talk about two budget proposals that are related to HR 1 implementation. The overall theme of these proposals is that California is choosing not to use its vast resources to backfill the gaps that have been created by Congress and the president, and with this choice are further inflicting violence on immigrant groups. So the governor's budget could take away healthcare from immigrant groups in two ways. The first is that for groups with certain immigration statuses, which includes refugees and asylees and survivors of trafficking and domestic violence, they lose eligibility on October 1st of 2026 for the federal share of the Medicaid match due to HR 1. So this is a federal law that says this group of immigrants no longer gets federal matching funds for Medicaid. Rather than support this group with state-funded Medi-Cal, the governor is proposing to terminate coverage for people with these specific immigration statuses, leaving them with only emergency and pregnancy coverage. The state says it would cost $786 million to continue providing Medi-Cal to this group for the year and $1.1 billion per year ongoing. And the result of this proposal would be that around 200,000 Californians would lose healthcare access this year on October 1st. The second proposal that's also related to HR 1 implementation is that the governor's budget proposes applying work requirements and 6-month eligibility redeterminations to people who are on state-only Medi-Cal because they have unsatisfactory immigration status. So in this proposal, starting in January 2027, this group would be subject to the extra requirements, which is not required by federal law, since this group is only getting state-funded Medi-Cal, not a federal share of cost. And the result would be that people with unsatisfactory immigration status would be at greater risk of losing Medi-Cal, which is especially concerning since they cannot newly enroll in Medi-Cal as of January 1st of this year. And as a reminder, that was a policy change that came about in last year's state budget. So if you're concerned about these two policy changes or anything else related to HR 1 implementation, you can advocate in the Senate Budget Subcommittee 3 on Health and Human Services and the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 1 on Health. I'm now going to turn it over to Allegra to talk about education.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. My name is Allegra Sierra Fisher, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior policy attorney with our youth practice group at Disability Rights California. And I'm very happy to be here tonight to share a few points about education that appear both in the governor's budget first draft proposal, as well as some other recent developments. So the governor did highlight that there is a per pupil spending increase in this year's budget, and that it's the highest that it's ever been. And the reason that this is somewhat significant is that the way that schools are funded in California is based on the number of students attending. It's based on something called average daily attendance. And so schools receive money based on how many students are coming to school. And so the amount per student is going to be at an all-time high, which is certainly a good thing. However, we do think that that is tempered by continued district level budget challenges that many districts across the state are experiencing, in part due to declining enrollment in public schools, not only in urban centers, but in many different counties across the state due to a variety of factors. So essentially, when there are fewer students enrolled in school and coming to school, then even if you have a higher amount of money per student coming into the district and each school site, there's going to be, that those two things are going to essentially balance each other out. So our second point here on our slide is that there is going to be an increase in state special education dollars across all regions of the state, which essentially means that the amount that districts are receiving per student in order to pay for services and supports for students with disabilities will be going up proportionally across the different regions of the state. So every single region of the state will receive an increase in what is called the base rate, which essentially means the amount of money that each region of the state has available to pay for those services. However, at the same time, unfortunately, in California, the way that funds are allocated to serve students with disabilities is based on the total attendance in the district rather than the total number of students with disabilities. So if one district has a higher percentage, for example, of students with disabilities, that is not necessarily accounted for in the way that special education is funded at the state level. So again, we are pleased that there is an increase in this so-called base rate for services and supports for students with disabilities. However, there is, a little bit more to the story. Something that is very much a positive is that the governor has allotted $1 billion for the community schools program across the state. Community schools are, it's an approach to education that centers the school as like a community hub and provides lots of different services, such as access to public benefits like Medi-Cal and food assistance right on site at the school for not only the students who attend, but also their entire families. So it's a really great model and serves students with disabilities in a very holistic manner, as well as all students. So we are pleased and very supportive of the community schools model. We wanted to mention a couple of other things, so including the federal budget and federal funding for special education and education as a whole. This webinar is focused on our state budget, but we wanted to mention this because it's been in the news a whole lot, and we've received a lot of questions from community members, concerned students and parents, and fellow advocates about what do these potential changes mean for us and our students on the ground in California? And so we wanted to highlight that there is essentially some good news coming out of Washington, D.C. regarding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding. The acronym appears here on the slide, IDEA. That is the law that provides funding from the federal government to the states, including California, for special education, as well as some oversight and monitoring to ensure that students are receiving appropriate supports and services in school. And what we have learned is that that Congress has reached a deal to maintain that special education federal funding steady with what it was last year. So there won't be cuts, at least at this point. It does not look like there will be any cuts, which had been threatened. So this is a piece of good news, and it means that hopefully the same amount of federal dollars that districts across the state received last year, they will again receive in this upcoming fiscal year. Of course, that doesn't account for, inflation and other increased costs, but at least it will not be less than what was received last year. And the other piece, or the last piece we want to mention on this slide, is that in the governor's budget, there is $3.6 million allotted for a new California Office of Civil Rights for Education. And this office will be focusing on preventing discrimination at school sites. And so that will include, DRC is advocating for that to include preventing disability discrimination at school sites. And this office, the way that the statutes and regulations are written right now, this office will be coordinating to some extent with the California Department of Education. And I have a little bit more information related to civil rights in education on our next slide. But first, I wanted to point out that here at the bottom in our green box, we do have the links to our Senate Budget Subcommittee 1 on education and the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 3 on education finance. And these are the special education subcommittees in our state legislature where you can reach out if you would like to express your support for any of these, items that we've highlighted or anything else related to education in the governor's budget proposal. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So we at DRC are collecting stories of disability discrimination in schools. And one of the reasons that we're doing this is that at the federal level, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights has unfortunately been greatly reduced. And actually, a press release just came out that shows that about 90% of the complaints that they've received in the last year have been dismissed without even really being reviewed. So we're really concerned about this gap in the enforcement of civil rights for students, right? And we want to make sure that students have a meaningful way, students and families have a meaningful way to be able to file a complaint directly with an authority that can respond appropriately and make sure that school districts are complying with the law. And so for this reason, we are looking at ways to increase California's ability to fill this gap. And to this end, we are doing advocacy at the state and federal level. And we are putting out this call for stories. They can be submitted in English or in Spanish or in another language, and we will do our best to get those translated. We are asking for video stories if you're willing, but we also accept audio and written stories if you prefer to remain anonymous or if that's just what you prefer to submit. And we are asking that people do provide your zip code if you choose to submit a story at this link that's at the bottom of our slide. We'll also place in the chat, we will place the direct link that you can click on to go to DRC's website that has the full information on how to submit a story and what they will be potentially used for. And we do want to note that sending stories is entirely voluntary and it does not create an attorney-client relationship with DRC. These stories will be used on our social media as well as in advocacy with government officials, potentially both at the state and federal level, to uplift the need for greater civil rights enforcement in our schools. Thank you very much, and I will pass to my colleague.
Thank you, Allegra. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Monica. I use she, her pronouns, and I work on homelessness and mental health policy at Disability Rights California. A brief visual description. I am a white woman with brown hair pulled back. I have black rimmed glasses, and today I'm wearing a purple sweater. We are about at the halfway mark of today's webinar, so I want to just pause to take a breath because this is a lot. It's really great that you're here to get involved and get informed, and we're so glad that you're here. And if you are feeling at all overwhelmed, you are very much not alone. So with that brief pause and breath, maybe a little bit of a stretch, we'll kick into our second half. I'm going to be talking about the housing, homeless, and mental health portions of the proposed budget. Regarding housing, we are unfortunately not seeing a meaningful increased investment in housing. Several affordable housing programs are appearing to not receive any new funding. We are seeing money go towards implementing new agencies and committees as part of the governor's reorganization plan. And we're continuing to see existing money move around. So there is a large dollar amount of $2.25 billion that goes towards Home Key Plus. This is the housing bond funded by Prop 1. Folks who are familiar with Prop 1 will remember, of course, that this is not new money. This is moving money from a mental health services pot to a housing pot. And of course, we know we need both, not one or the other. Given the ongoing severe lack of affordable, accessible housing in California, we would like to see a much stronger investment here. Regarding homelessness, the proposed budget does not appear to attempt to make up for federal funding cuts to housing and homeless assistance programs. We're also seeing a decrease in state investment here. An example of that is what is called HAP, HHAP, which stands for Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention. For HAP, we are seeing a 50% reduction from previous years. Like the name of the program suggests, HAP provides funding for homelessness prevention, shelter, services, and rental assistance for permanent housing. HAP has served over 300,000 Californians and has enabled 80,000 people to exit homelessness since 2023. Spread across all of California's counties and cities, $500 million does not provide local governments enough to meet the need. Additionally, this year's proposed budget includes language that homeless assistance funding depends on aligning with state priorities. This conditional funding is similar to what we're seeing at the federal level, where you condition funding on aligning with the administration's priorities. Given the governor's focus on rounding up people experiencing homelessness, we're really concerned with this requirement. The biggest homelessness investment we're seeing in this proposed budget is $1 billion for what's called the Encampment Resolution Fund. They say that the goal of this fund is to provide services and housing to help people transition out of homelessness. But we know from the community that when someone is displaced from an encampment, they're left with very little, and few, if anyone, has actually been connected to housing. As Sabrina mentioned at the top, we're just at the start of this process. So if any of these items are concerning to you, or you'd like to learn more or engage more, you can follow up with the Senate Budget Subcommittee 4 or the Assembly Budget Subcommittee 5. The names are a little vague. They're the ones that have the name State Administration, and those are the ones that cover housing and homelessness. There's also opportunities to connect with local and statewide advocates. One of those is called the Equal Rights for Every Neighbor Coalition, and we'll share out information on how you can sign up to attend meetings or join that mailing list. Next slide, please. Mental health and behavioral health are touched on in multiple parts of the proposed budget. I'm going to go a little bit out of order and start with the second point on this slide. We were disappointed but not surprised to see additional proposed funding for care court implementation. As expensive and ineffective as that program has been. We were also disappointed but not surprised to see increased investment in providing mental health services in jails and prisons. With the investment in this proposed budget, it brings the mental health budget at CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, up to $126.1 million total. What we need instead is voluntary, peer-led, community-based mental health services. This includes peer-run hotlines and warm lines, mobile crisis response, and peer respites. In this proposed budget, we are seeing cuts to community-based mental health services, which are especially concerning as we continue to face cuts at the federal level. In terms of someone to call, we are seeing proposed increased funding for 988, but we're seeing cuts to peer-led warm lines. Generally, when a call center is staffed by someone with behavioral health expertise, including peers, we know that as many as 80% of calls or texts can be resolved over the phone and don't need any kind of response or moving the person. These programs save money. In California, the California Peer Run Warm Line is estimated to save the state over $90 million per year because they've helped people who otherwise would have ended up in the ER or the emergency room. So what we'd like to see is a stronger investment in this sort of early intervention and preventative care. For people who do need an in-person response, mobile crisis services are really important. It's important to send the right response. If an individual is having a heart attack and they call for help, we send a medical professional. If an individual is having a panic attack, we should send a mental health professional, not the police. And so continuing to invest in mobile crisis services is really important. If any of these topics are of interest to you to learn or engage more, follow up with a couple of Senate budget subcommittees. There's one on Health and Human Services, and there's one on Public Safety and the Judiciary. And then on the Assembly side, there's a subcommittee on health. And if you'd like to connect with folks in the community, there are a number of ways to do that. One example for mental health peers is a group called PAR, Peers Advocating for Rights and Recovery. If you're interested in connecting with this group or any others, please feel free to reach out. And next, I'll turn it over to Vivian.
Thank you, Monica. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Hahn. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior policy attorney here at Disability Rights California, where I work on legislative and budget advocacy in the regional center system. I also have a brother who has autism and is served by the regional center system. I am an Asian American woman with glasses. I am wearing a navy blazer, and I have a Disability Rights California background. With regard to the Department of Developmental Services, there are a number of budget proposals this year. Right now, there are 9 proposals, 8 of which have been posted already on the website for the state's Department of Finance. And at the bottom of this slide, you can see a link to the webpage where you can find all of these proposals and more proposals. So please take a moment to check it out when you can. Because there are a number of proposals tonight, I'm just going to highlight a few of them for you. And one proposal that we think will be of great interest to people served by regional centers is a proposal for a new grievance process. Now, this is a big deal, we think, because the grievance process that we are talking about will be replacing what is currently known as the 4731 complaint process. That is an existing process that people have used in the regional center system for a long time to flag or bring up many different types of complaints or potential issues in the system. Now, these complaints are different from what you might know as fair hearings or Lanterman appeals. Those are hearings that the Office of Administrative Hearings, or OAH, conducts if and when you disagree with your regional center, if you feel like what they have offered to you, the services supports they've offered to you are inadequate or inappropriate. You can also have go to a fair hearing when you believe you should be eligible for regional center services, but the regional center has denied your eligibility. That's a separate and different complaint process that we are not talking about tonight. That complaint process is staying the same. What this proposal would do would be to overhaul or make some major changes to the current 4731 complaint process, which is a process that many people use for, I would say it's more like a catch-all kind of complaint process in our system. So if you are coming from K through 12 education and you're familiar with the UCP or Uniform Complaint Process, it's similar to that. It's also similar to, say, the grievance process that many managed care plans have, where if you feel like something has gone wrong or you feel like there's been a violation of some kind, there is a process through which you can go file a complaint, let people know. And so the 4731 complaint is the analogous or similar process for the regional center system. So that's why we think you might be interested in this proposal. To make a long story short, there is a new federal regulation that requires state developmental disability systems to have a new type of grievance in place by July of 2026. That's really soon. That's in just a few months. So in July, DDS has to have a new grievance process up and running. And this new process has to allow people to file a complaint if they feel their regional center or service provider are not following what we call the HCBS, or Home and Community-Based Services Settings Rule requirements. And I will explain that on the next slide. But what you should know is that DDS is proposing to meet this new federal requirement which they have to do, through a new grievance process and combine that with what we now know as the current 4731 complaint process. Next slide. So, what DDS would like to do is to have a new process that would serve both purposes at the same time. So the new proposed grievance process that they would like to put in place in July would do two things at once. So first, it would comply with the new federal requirements by creating a way for people to file complaints about violations of or potential violations of the HCBS settings rule. And the kinds of things that you could file on are things like potential problems with the person-centered planning process. So for example, if you feel like your IPP was not held in a timely manner, that would be one example. You would also be able to file a complaint about the person-centered plan itself. For instance, if you felt like your IPP did not accurately reflect your needs or preferences. And finally, you would be able to file a complaint if you felt that there was a possible violation of one of the several requirements of the HCBS settings rule that have to do with residential settings. So for example, if you lived in a group home and you felt like your group home was inappropriately placing restrictions on who can visit you or when, if they might be violating your privacy, if they don't let you lock your doors, if they don't give you opportunities for community integration, or if you feel like you are being inappropriately subjected to coercion or restraint, this new process would give you a way to file a complaint about that. The new grievance process would also replace and upgrade the current 4731 complaint process. It would allow you to file on many of the same issues, but it would be different. There would be some new procedural steps. So the way you would file the complaints would be different, and they have tried to streamline it. The timelines will also be different. The proposal puts a greater emphasis on identifying patterns and systemic problems through this complaint process. And it also includes a new anti-retaliation provision, which is designed to prevent regional centers or service providers from retaliating against anyone who might file a complaint against them. Now, there are many more details to this proposal, and so we will actually be putting on a separate webinar to focus specifically on these changes. So we have just scheduled that webinar. It will be February 24th. So look for more information and an invitation from Disability Rights California to learn more about this proposal. And again, that will be on Tuesday, February 24th. Next slide. There's two other big changes in these proposals that we wanted to highlight for you. One is a joint proposal between the Department of Developmental Services and the Department of Rehabilitation, or DOR. So for people served by regional centers who want to find employment and want to be employed, in the past, they have often been forced to ping pong and to go back and forth between these two systems in order to access the types of supports that they need. And that's been inefficient and hard and confusing and really frustrating for people. So what DDS and DOR are now now want to do is to develop a new interagency agreement that would strengthen their ability to coordinate across their two departments and to change how they implement their funding streams so that that process of having to go back and forth will become a lot smoother and more seamless and much easier for people to navigate when they need support to find a job or to stay employed in that job. We're very excited about that proposal. And lastly, there is another major proposal that focuses on changes to regional center governance and oversight. And this one just came out, so we are still reading through it and analyzing it. But we can tell you that it involves changes to who serves on regional center boards. It involves changes to the contracts that regional centers have with DDS. And it also includes a new requirement requiring all regional centers to have an advisory committee made up of people who get regional center services or self-advocates. Now, where to advocate on these proposals? There are two subcommittees in the legislature. One is the Senate Budget Subcommittee 3 on Health and Human Services. The other subcommittee is Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 2 on Human Services. And I will talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So, what's next? Trailer bill language. We have talked about trailer bill language. You may have heard about trailer bill language. What is that? That is a fancy way of saying these are the proposals that we keep talking about. Whenever a governor proposes a budget, that involves not just saying, here is a bunch of money for this purpose. Oftentimes, they also need to include details about what to do with that money. How is that money supposed to be used? How should it not be used? So any proposed changes that are needed to the law in order for the state to implement the policies in the governor's budget, those all are put into something called trailer bills, which is a special type of legislation. And as we mentioned earlier, the trailer bill language for most of the proposals we talked about tonight, those just came out and were just posted on the Department of Finance website. We were able to talk about some of those high-level points that we know about so far, but again, there's a lot there. And so Disability Rights California will be taking a closer look, and we will have more detailed analysis for you all soon. And I will turn it back over to Sabrina.
Hi all, this is Sabrina. In the last couple minutes, I just wanted to mention that there are many ways to advocate. Your stories and perspectives are needed to make the budget reflect the real lives of Californians with disabilities. So now is the perfect time to reach out to your assembly member or senator or the assembly members and senators on these key committees with any concerns, any support you want to share for any of the proposals we've discussed today. There are budget hearings coming up, and you can find their schedules on the websites. And again, we are going to share these slides with everyone who registered very shortly after the presentation this evening. So from there, in the last few minutes, we will have some questions. Before we get into questions, I just wanted to mention that if you want assistance from Disability Rights California, the best way to do so is to call our helpline, which is at 1-800-776-5746, or on our website. and that this is a public webinar, so please be mindful of any information that you share and try to keep it on topic to the proposals that we discussed this evening. So I think the first question that we wanted to address is from the chat. One person asked, is the backup provider program different than WPCS? So I'm going to turn that one to Anna. And Anna, if you can also say what WPCS is, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So WPCS is Waiver Personal Care Services. So what this looks like in practice is it's essentially more IHSS services beyond the normal 283-hour cap that people can get only through the home and community-based alternatives waiver, often called the HCBA waiver. So to answer Tiffany's question, yes, it's a completely different program. Nothing in this proposal will impact anybody's WPCS services, even if those services are provided through a WPCS agency. So the backup provider program was totally separate. In most counties, is administered by the public authority. So
Thanks, Anna. Okay, I see there's a couple questions or maybe just an exchange in the chat that was about that 90% number that Allegra mentioned. Allegra, do you want to just share what the link is that you put in the chat and where that number came from?
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. Hi again. So yes, the Government Accountability Office, which is a part of the federal government, did a review of the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights and determined this, that 90% of the cases that were filed since, I believe it was either since January 1, 2025 or since March 1, 2025, were dismissed without even being reviewed. So this is extremely concerning, and a huge portion of the staff as well were laid off. But because of lawsuits that were filed in court, they had to continue to be paid. So there was over $38 million that was paid to staff of the Office of Civil Rights who were not working because they were not allowed to work. So this is very concerning, of course, to us. And we already knew that this office had been decimated and was not able to fulfill the functions that it had been for years prior in, enforcing the civil rights of students with disabilities in schools. So this was not exactly a surprise, but very concerning nonetheless. And we will share links to the press release as well as to this GAO, Government Accountability Office report, when we send the materials out.
Thank you so much, Allegra. If folks have any more questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat or raise your hand and we can call on you to unmute or turn your video on if you would like to sign. I don't see any more questions right now in the Q&A or the chat. Vivian is noting that DRC will have another webinar about the proposed new grievance process for regional centers. So stay tuned for that, more to come. Well, if there are oh, here's another question. Is there any info on OCR/RC cases that were dismissed? Allegra?
Yes, this is a great follow-up question. So regarding OCR, the Office of Civil Rights at the federal level, I unfortunately haven't had a chance to fully review the report yet. I don't know that it's broken down by types of complaints that were dismissed. But we can definitely share that information again when we follow up with folks or highlight that for you to look at portions of the report that may contain that information. And I don't work on regional center complaints, but would welcome any of my colleagues who might want to weigh in on that piece to do so.
Yeah, and I can just speak very briefly. Hi, William. Good question. If there were to be federal complaints filed about regional center issues, those would have been filed with the Federal Health and Human Services Agency, or IHSS. And right now, things are a bit chaotic there. We are not really sure exactly what is going on with the Office of Civil Rights at the Federal Health and Human Services Agency, among many other things we are concerned and confused by. So I wish I had an answer for you, but what I can say is that I personally have not seen any similar data or any information similar to the very specific data that Allegra shared about education civil rights complaints. I have not seen anything yet that specific that tells us about the status of similar complaints on the regional center side, at least at the federal level.
Thanks so much, Vivian and Allegra. And yeah, I think that is the pros and cons of sharing real-time information with the public is we don't have all the answers and all of the analysis yet. This is breaking news, but you are all asking the correct questions. I see that Isan has a hand raised. You should be able to unmute.
Hello, I just wanted to say thank you for this webinar. This is a wonderful webinar. I'm a client that is served by the regional center. I'm a regional center client and also a member of an organization that is called San Diego People First. We advocate for people with disabilities, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in this webinar. And I wanna see how can I get involved so that I can advocate in the recent changes that have been proposed by the governor through that regional center and to many agencies, because the reason why I'm here is because I wanna help others who don't have the opportunity to speak up I want to be a voice for our community, you know. So I really thank you for this information, but this is the only way that we are going to be informed.
Yeah, thank you for that question and for sharing that you have a personal connection to the topics that we're talking about. Um, the way that you can advocate is by calling or emailing your state legislator. We have links that we are going to share out with you that will take you directly to their websites. And you can also stay involved with DRC. We can follow up with you. Maybe there's something that we can do to collaborate with San Diego People First. I would love to work with y'all because your voices are so important, especially as regional center consumers, to share your perspective on the topics that are directly influencing your lives.
So
So let's follow up and we'll talk more about it, okay?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but the changes that are currently happening, we have a long way to go with those changes, right? We don't
Right.
even know when that is gonna be implemented, because right now I have a pretty good service coordinator, and nobody wants to go. Nobody wants to go back to. I mean, we all wanna try, you know. So my if you can help me up, like you mentioned, to connect with you guys, and if we can, if we can be all, if we can do teamwork to communicate with our senators and our legislators so that we can make our voices heard. That would be so helpful, not only for me but for the whole community. Because my mom is also my caregiver, and my family relies on that support to be together, because my mom is taking care of me, and she is my IHSS provider. So I'm pretty much involved in all of these topics, and that's why I wanted to speak today, because I wanna I wanna I wanna let you guys know that you guys are causing an impact in the positive impact in the disability community.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, we will definitely be in touch. I appreciate your passion so much. And I think that there are some policymakers who really need to hear from you. So I'm going to do my best to make that happen. I'll follow up with you for sure. I'm going to take one more question from the chat, which is that will DRC be involved with assisting the subcommittees in navigating solutions? Absolutely. We are actively working on it. You might see some familiar faces here at the subcommittee hearings. We don't know yet, but we'll probably be there in some capacity. DRC will show up. We are right here advocating alongside all of you. That is what we are charged with. That is our goal and our mission. And so we are going to do our best to amplify the voices of the disability community and make sure that our rights are not threatened by these budget cuts. And I hope that you all can be a part of it too, because the legislature needs to hear from you. I think that the budget right now does not reflect disabled Californians' experiences well and the priorities that we have put forth, but we can change that. And in past years, we've really fought and won on some of these issues. This is the time to advocate. So thank you all so much. Thank you to my esteemed colleagues for joining me this evening and helping answer your questions. Thank you to our ASL and Spanish interpreters. And we will follow up with slides and links and eventually an accessible recording. That one will just take us a few minutes. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.